I hurt every single person in my life. People who loved me, people who cared for me, people who knew me and spent substantial parts of their lives with me. I hurt many of them to a devastating degree. At the very least, my behavior incited anger and disappointment. On the other hand, it put fear and helplessness in the hearts of people who are innocent and blameless. I went to prison on a charge of solicitation of another to commit murder. It was the end of a dark, ruinous path I chose to walk down for far too long. Putting good people through pain and misery is a monumental regret I will carry for the rest of my life. I wish every day I could take it back. Days in a prison cell are what they're supposed to be. Every silent minute defaulted to the shameful recollection of who I'd become and what I'd done. The scope of suffering I created and my inability to change it. Who and what I had lost and my inability to undo that great harm. For me, those minutes occupied hours that slowly became days, for months upon months, spanning almost 4 years. Over those years, I began to seek hope in the mess of my shame and disgrace. I chose to believe that I could take small steps from out of the depths of my self-inflicted ruin, that the lessons I've learned from my mistakes and failures could be used to signal others away from a similar course. I have a heart for those struggling with mental health and addiction. The complexities of both plagued my past, and it is my desire to help them in their journey through and out of those things. Prison granted me both time and opportunities to complete all the necessary courses to become an addiction treatment counselor. It gave me the opportunity to make a positive impact as a case manager at a recovery facility upon my release. It gave me a chance to make a difference. I resent the person I became during the darkest period of my past. A large part of my life's work now is to prevent others from going down the same destructive paths. I stand against all forms of domestic violence and any other type of behavior that creates fear or feelings of helplessness in others. I'm thankful for every new day and consider each one an opportunity to do something positive in any way I can. I accept and acknowledge that many will resent and reject me. Though I live and breathe remorse daily, it will never erase the pain I inflicted upon the world around me and within the lives of those who never deserved it. I understand the varying degrees, conditions, and timeframes every individual has with regards to their capacity to forgive. I'm tremendously grateful for anyone who has accepted my efforts to make amends and ultimately given me a second chance, especially those who have known me at my worst.
After his arrest, Tim's lack of empathy and disconcern for those he hurt led us to believe there was no hope for change. It was heartbreaking to see he no longer resembled the person I once knew. At a point in time, he and I were close. We started Azalea Dying together, and we stayed committed to it during those tough early times. Over time, we found like-minded individuals, guys with comparable dedication and drive. With Nick, Phil, and then Josh in the fold, we had finally grown into the identity of what the band is still today. There is a very special bond and dynamic formed through being in a highly active band for over a decade. Your relationship is a balance of creative collaboration, working through disagreements together, and living in close proximity, like roommates, for the majority of your lives. Naturally, that sort of relationship is vulnerable to tension, distance, and isolation if unaddressed.
With Tim, we slowly lived through what became a drastic change in character and composure over the years. In the early days, it was his tenacity and focus that kept the band moving forward. The sort of ambition and focus he possessed was something we all admired. His focus and commitments to specific outcomes gave us the resilience to weather the challenges and obstacles most bands face when trying to make things happen for themselves. With time and success, though, we saw those same strengths shift towards personal interest, often above all else. His positions and things became more obviously self-centric. His inability to understand or assume any perspective other than his own created years of turmoil at first, but eventually grew to personal detachment within the group. In order to keep the wheels from falling off, everyone sort of withdrew into their own worlds and operated in a somewhat detached manner that kept the band dynamic emotionally distant but professionally functional. We were all identifying his trajectory towards self-destruction, but no one expected the drastic and devastating degree of where his behavior would lead.
Tim's arrest and incarceration marked only the beginning for everyone near this. I think for me and maybe the rest of the guys, we were in a state of shock and avoidance for years. While our pain wasn't to the same degree as those he harmed, there was no real precedent in our lives or the history of our friends and family to advise us on how to handle or process what had happened. We started new things, new bands, new careers, businesses, different journeys with positive intent to draw our focus away from the monumental chaos of what we had been forced to live through. I was always taught to work, to put my head down and do good, to be good. I'm proud of every endeavor I invested myself in, but over time I began to realize that the attention towards cathartic and meaningful pursuits does not necessarily equate to repairing what's damaged. What we learned over the years is that there is no bouncing back. Some things are just so extreme, so heavy and unreal that they break you. They change who you are and who you used to be. The best you can do is learn how to pick up the pieces and put yourself back together. Hope and pray that wounds will heal.
We all turned to whatever we could to reclaim some semblance of balance back in our lives. Some of those things were healthy, some of those were not. The years spent busying ourselves and neglecting the damage within eventually created tension and distance between some of us. Phil, Josh, Jordan, and I were the only ones who truly understood the complexity of what the other was going through, and none of us could find viable solutions to emotionally recover. Hopelessness is a fear without end. Peace and restoration feel beyond reach. It can leave you feeling lost and isolated, even in the presence of other people. For some of us, time itself did not mend wounds, but it did inform us of unhealthy ways to cope. Hatred is unhealthy. I've learned over the years that if someone hurts you, or even just people you care about, it's natural and completely valid to be angry and resentful towards them. It's your decisions on how to handle the weight of those emotions that will dictate the quality of your life thereafter. Avoidance solves nothing. We tried for years to take the out of sight, out of mind approach. I believe time can heal, but some of that time needs to be spent actively trying to fix what's damaged. We spent years focusing on positive activities and endeavors, but in the end, all well-intentioned endeavors felt like us trying to apply band-aids upon broken bones. I learned that trying to control the things you cannot will leave you frustrated and feeling powerless. I spent years stewing in anger that Tim didn't get a longer prison sentence. I consistently let myself become angry at the idea of him being happy again after his release. Both things outside of my control that I was somehow allowing to let steer my emotions. I was constantly flustered by my inability to create an identity of my own. It felt as if my value became what people could get me to say about Tim, and the attention that sort of headline could attract. It didn't really matter what positive pursuit or endeavor I was trying to draw direct focus to. I felt like the only story I was worth. My inability to control the narrative others kept me in furthered my internal resentments and anger. On the other end of things, I found that the applications of love, forgiveness, and compassion are true in their power to relieve. Somewhere along the years, Phil and I had a falling out. Interpersonal band frustrations, the pressures of owning and running our venue, plus the weight of our personal lives, created a 1.5-year-long rift of non-communication and bitterness. It's toxic to carry acrimonious feelings in your heart. It's hard to live a genuinely kind and peaceful life while refusing to release ill will. That sort of coexistence is unsustainable. Phil and I's reconnection was rooted in the desire to let go of the animosity we were allowing to consume us. We both recognized our roles and where things went south, and desired more to find positive resolve and reconciliation than wasting years hating one another. Through that, I believe we learned the profound value of what forgiveness can do for oneself.
None of us were expecting Tim to completely and publicly take ownership of his past. We had seen prior behavior where he attempted to excuse his actions and place blame on other people, substances, or circumstances. I think for all of us, it created a sort of trepidation towards what he might do or say after being released. That there would be this threat of him abusing a public platform to sell his side of the story in a way that was untruthful. So when we were made aware of his release, we initially resisted his efforts to formally apologize, as we wanted to see what he did, not just what he said. We needed to see examples of a changed human being, someone who recognized, acknowledged, and expressed deep remorse for who they were and what they had done. And over time, that's who he had shown himself to be. We saw these changes through his work in the recovery community and proactivity in prison outreach. He also respectfully utilized the reach of our band's platform to not just say he was truly and deeply sorry, but to take responsibility for everything. Our expectations for all these years was for him to emerge from prison as a different version of his older self, perhaps worse. But when we saw something positively unexpected, by way of deeds and behavior, it opened us all up to the notion that Tim may have made some substantial progress and change throughout his process of rehabilitation.
When you observe over time, someone sincere in their efforts to make amends, pick themselves back up, and try to utilize the lessons they've learned to become a better person, it makes it easier to let go of the resentments you've been carrying from the past.
It took a lot for me to let Tim back in my life. I needed to see a changed man who was also held accountable for his actions. His years spent in prison changed him in a positive way. So for me, the combination of him facing his punishment, growing for the better because of it, being sincere in his expression of remorse, and committing his life to atonement was enough for me to hear him out.
I had seen enough of what Tim was doing right to finally meet up. He utilized a lot of that time respectfully by simply listening. Hearing me express my experience with what he put everyone through, and then apologizing for and acknowledging the consequences of his actions for others. There was a vulnerability I had never seen before from him, and I began to understand and recognize that he too was trying to pick up whatever pieces of his life that he could.
Everyone had spent years dealing with inner turmoil and the unhealthy harboring of cancerous emotions. We had learned the value of what letting go of those things could do for ourselves. So when we finally saw an opportunity to love and forgive and accept, we seized it. To be in an atmosphere where there's care and concern for one another, and a dynamic that had once become distant and intolerable, is something we are tremendously grateful for. This band wasn't initially built on friendship, but through all these years, in this awful situation, one has now grown from it. Through all of this, I have come to recognize the importance of actively seeking help for the varying struggles people endure. We all come from different places, with different upbringings, with different complexities of relationships and various scopes of hardships. Life has unique ways of exposing us all to great joy and great sorrow. It's natural and effortless to share in the ups of our experiences. But when we're low, when we're down, the intricacy of pain can be so many different things, all of which we tend to keep inside. I believe there is unbelievable power in communities built on love, acceptance, and healing. It's so important in what seems like a world of emotional disarray for a charity like HeartSupport to exist. We believe in their main purpose, to help young people overcome depression and various forms of adversity, whether by a live interaction through their Twitch community or their anonymous support wall, or even just seeking professional help in general. It's imperative to address all forms of deep mental and emotional duress with someone that is equipped to help you. No one should bear those crippling burdens on their own.
I hope the downfall of my past can be redefined by the way I live the rest of the life I do have ahead of me. That I can prove over time how the process of serving my sentence created a renewed sense of purpose and desire to do what I can to make amends with those I've hurt. To put my life into the people, works, and endeavors I love, and contribute in all the ways I can to facilitate healing for those who've ever felt hopeless, broken, alienated, desperate, or traumatized. I resent and rebuke who I became and what I had done. Everyone does. As a band, our agenda is to actively back and work with organizations who offer support to those who are emotionally suffering and in pain. Whether it be from a history of abuse, hardship, or mental illness, proactivity in healing and recovery is at the core of what this band is now. We wanted to share and release a video detailing our journey specifically through HeartSupport, an organization we believe in that functions to provide emotional support and counseling to young adults caught in the cycles of addiction, depression, sexual abuse, and domestic violence. Our mission is to continually seek and implement ways to facilitate positive, meaningful change in the world around us. Even if simple interest in the details of our personal stories guides a single person to the HeartSupport website, where they end up realizing they can be helped through issues they are dealing with, that alone would be something positive we can draw from all this dark history. We live in a climate that perpetually highlights stories of disgrace, misery, or failure. Where ours was at one point all of those things, I believe there can be powerful potential in the wholehearted pursuit to do what it is we love and have chemistry doing together. And from lessons learned from the past, and through this endeavor, extract lessons of love, forgiveness, healing, and the ability to turn your life around from its lowest point. By trying our best to make as much good from this as possible, we commit to sharing and standing behind a rather simple message. There can be hope for everyone.